Hello, Magic is Real friends. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm Shannon. I am a psychic medium and I'm the host of this podcast. I'm so happy to have you here. And if you like this podcast, it would mean the world to me if you can like, subscribe, and share with like minded people. Feel free to reach out to me at magicisrealshannon@gmail.com with questions, suggestions, insights, or anything you'd like to share. I love to meet you. Thank you for that. So, listen, today I have with me Jeremy Kagan. I'm very excited to have him here. He is someone that I met in through the International Association of Near-Death Studies. He is a near-death experiencer, but he is also, I'm going to read his little tiny bio so I don't mess it all up, but he's a filmmaker. He's a film and television director, writer, producer, professor at the School of Cinematic Arts, USC, founder of the Change-Making Media Lab, chairperson of special projects for the DGA, which is the Directors Guild. Uh, Thank you so much, Jeremy, for coming here to talk about your near-death experience and UFOs. You wrote the story, you produced and you directed the movie Roswell, starring Martin Sheen and Kyle MacLachlan when he was so young. And I watched half of it last night, and it's very good. So thank you so much for being here.
It is my pleasure. I'm glad to be.
Yes, I would love to start by talking about you, Jeremy, the human being. I would love to know anything as it pertains to your spiritual journey. How did you grow up? Were you spiritual? Was your family religious? Did you have any spiritual experiences growing up?
My father was a reformed rabbi in New York City, actually right outside of New York City. Um, but the kind of religious sort of background that I experienced was far more secular than others who have been in this particular tradition. Um, so what I grew up with was he was also he had his PhD. He was also a psychotherapist as well as having a congregation. But I grew up in, I would say, a far more rational approach to just existence itself. So I didn't, although I've always been a dreamer, meaning that I dreams almost every night, and sometimes I record them and write them down and all the rest. But I didn't really sort of grow up with any particular idea of even sort of the concept of what does it mean, what does God really mean, and certainly what does spirituality mean. And though the tradition I come from has a deep, deep spiritual tradition, but I didn't know anything about it because my father was a far more, we need to live in the now. We need to take care of the problems, and particularly the social and political problems of our time. He marched with Martin Luther King Sr. and Jr. During the Civil Rights Movement. He was quite an active activist as a preacher, dealing with things like trying to end war. So that's the background I came from, not from a spiritual background. But when I made this movie, and there's an image from it, and that's an image of me called The Chosen, which is from a book that was written by a guy named Chaim Potek. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. And it's about the very, very spiritual group of people that are part of the Jewish tradition, known as the Hasidim, which sort of, they're committed to a very, very both spiritual and specific sort of ritualistic way of living their lives. And I knew nothing about them. I was just, making this movie with, there's Rod Steiger. He was one of the stars of that film, along with Maximilian Schell. But in the process of doing the research on this film, I got exposed to a tradition that I didn't know anything about, which was a spiritual tradition from where I come from. And part of that spiritual tradition is something that I'm sure some of your viewers know. It's called the Kabbalah, which actually means to receive. That's literally what it means. But I got exposed to this through these people who actually have that as part of their daily lives. And I began to study myself with a brilliant rabbi and teacher here in Los Angeles named Rabbi Stephen Robbins. And now I'm a part of my spiritual realities are that I practice a number of meditative exercises that come from Kabbalah. So it's now part of me, and it's weird because in a way, if you sort of believe in epigenetics or the idea of sort of generations of generations, this is thousands of years that have brought me to this very moment. And part of those thousands of years and the ancestors that I come from were actually practitioners of this very, very spiritual path. And it's quite amazing too, because those of you who are sort of maybe you're familiar with things like the chakras, if you're into yoga, well, in this tradition, there's something very similar. They're called the Sephiroth, but it's the same idea of kind of energy centers that are part of our body that are both physical, emotional, psychological, and psychic as well. And that's all part of my being now. So I'm indebted to having gotten to make this movie with there's Robbie Benson because it really
Oh,
did change.
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm old enough to remember Robbie Benson, but I haven't heard that name in so long. Uh, yeah, it's great. It's working with a director who it's nice that you're able to change your backgrounds to illustrate your points. I really appreciate you
Oh,
doing
go
that work
ahead.
for me.
In
That's
fact, here we are. There's Rod again, and there's me when I used to have hair, making the same movie. But so
wow.
interesting, by the way, when people make things, particularly, and I ask filmmakers all the time because I've been very, very fortunate as a film director to be very active with the Directors Guild of America, and I interview every year all the nominees for Best Feature Film. There are 3 books that have come out of it from these interviews called Directors Close-Up. And what's interesting is I often ask these directors, "Have you ever made a movie that actually changed you?" And some have not. Making this movie called The Chosen, that changed my life. Didn't know it was going to, but it did.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that. I'm actually
By the way,
personally.
there's my dad. Hi, Dad.
Oh, hi, Dad. I know we'll have to I'm so interested in your work too because I'm an actor and have been for the so it's interesting to hear all of this kind of put together. Um okay, and yes, when you had your near death experience, obviously you were spiritual because you had it during a spiritual ceremony, so I assumed that, obviously you were there. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Sure. Um, First of all, it's, I never heard of near-death experiences. If you said NDE, I would not have had any idea what that meant. None whatsoever. Um, but I was doing work with sort of exploring the spiritual side of who I am. Part of it was through my traditions, but also part of it was through a friend of mine who was exposing me to the traditions of, first of all, sacred medicines, but also specifically the Lakota. And the Lakota, we sort of know them as the Sioux if we talk about them, but they're obviously that's not their name for themselves. And they have, among other practices, sweat lodges. They were allowing people who were not indigenous to participate in these sweat lodges. And so I started to do that through this friend. They were fascinating because there are 4 levels to a Lakota sweat lodge. When you go into this very dark place, and you're essentially naked, but of course, it's dark, so nobody sees anybody, and it's extremely hot. And I'm not a fan of being in extremely hot places.
No.
Um, and the first stage is you talk about wishes for yourself. And what's interesting, by the way, if you wish for your own good health, the person next to you doesn't wish for their good health. Because even though you wished for yourself, you're wishing for everybody. Then there's a second round in which you, in fact, wishes and intentions for others. Then there's a third round, which is one of the most difficult ones, which is what are you willing to let go of? Boy, is that a tough one. And then there's a fourth round, which is silent. These are all very hot and get hotter and hotter and hotter. And I've done a number of them, and they've been meaningful to me just to be able to, when you're in that kind of heat, you have to tell the truth. It's not easy to lie in the heat. And I remember that in this particular experience, it was like a day before my birthday. It was cold. It was in December, and there was a sweat lodge up in the Malibu Hills here in Los Angeles. The Wright land, Frank Lloyd Wright's grandchildren owned it. And I thought it might be a good way to prepare for the next year of my existence. And when I came out of the sweat lodge, I suddenly fell to the ground. And I figured, oh, it must be this, in the heat or whatever it is, very cold outside, the heat, I'll be fine in a couple of seconds or minutes. But instead, I began to lose each one of my senses. I lost sense of, first, the very sense of movement. I couldn't move my body. And then I began to lose sight. I couldn't see. Everything started to get, like striated all around me. And then I couldn't hear. Everything began to. And I thought I was in real trouble. And I figured, well, they'll call paramedics or something like that. And as I realized that nothing was happening, I suddenly realized that I, I was supposed to be directing a television show that very next day. This was a Sunday night. I thought, well, I'm not going to show up for that show, so my career is over because a director doesn't show up for a show because he was at a sweat lodge. Forget that. That's not going to pass. Then I realized, more importantly, well, I can't communicate. That means they're going to take me to put me in some padded, space, and my family and will come, and I won't be able to speak with them or talk to them. That I will have to give up all my relations. And then I realized this is much more serious than just that. You're dying. The terror that came with that was just sort of overwhelming. What could I do? And what I tried to do, and when I tell this, I say, it's like, when you hold your breath for as long as you can hold your breath. Well, I was sort of doing that sort of interiorly, like I was holding my breath inside, or holding my entire being inside. And inevitably, I couldn't hold it any longer. And I had to let go. And I thought, this is death. And as I let go, there was this amazing sense of bliss, ease, calmness, serenity. I just sort of, oh my God, there's the,
Yeah, there's that sun in your eyes.
yeah, exactly. I'll come over here until the sun decides to move. But what happened was this sort of release, and the release was perfection. And I thought, oh, wow, death is really easy. People have talked about that. Some people say that, in fact, in my tradition, they sometimes say death is like taking a hair out of a glass of milk, just like that. And then you move on. It's not suffering. It's not. But then my mind was still alive, and I thought, well, this is amazing. I'm feeling, if there's a word to feeling, spectacular. But now what? And the minute the idea that there was going to be something, space was gone, but time wasn't. And now what occurred to me, and I thought, even though I was educated where there was the idea of heaven and hell, this wasn't part of the tradition I grew up in. My father didn't believe in either of those ideas, nor my mother. So, but you read about them, you see movies about them, the famous paintings about heaven and hell. I said, well, I certainly wasn't to go to heaven because, I'm not that good a guy. So what if I go to hell? And within a second, I went to my version of hell. Now, it's a pretty horrific version of hell, and I'm not going to share that. But if you want to, you can sort of, let me see if I can get out of those bright lights for a second. You can read the book itself, which is actually, you can get it on Amazon, and Balboa publishes it, called My Death, a personal guidebook. But what was interesting was that when I realized that hell was like watching a movie, it suddenly just disappeared. There is no such thing as hell. It is just our imagination. Now, listen, when you go to a good movie, you can get really scared in a good movie if it's a horror movie, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you can really believe it's happening. And, in a sense, it was, quote, happening, but it was all a fantasy. And once I realized that it was, in fact, a fantasy, that I'd made it up, then I began a very classic near-death experience. I would find out later because I never knew what that was, that people go on a kind of journey. You feel like you're on almost like a ride in a way, and you're being transported. And you're being transported through spaces, and oftentimes and other people have had this experience, kind of a cloudy sort of tunnelish space, and you're heading somewhere, but you don't know where. In my case, as I was moving through, there were these beings, but they were more sort of shadowy beings to my right and left, and they didn't speak. I didn't know who they were. I didn't know whether they were sort of the ancestors that were appearing in one way, or whether they were versions of people I know, but in this space they were somehow much more magical and ghost-like. And then I had this absolute feeling that I was moving towards something. And again, the feeling, and there was still a sense of I, the feeling was that this was perfect. This was beautiful. And then I could sense where I was headed. And it was like through the clouds into a star field like the one right behind you. And I thought and felt what I'm about to become is in fact a star. There are, what, a trillion galaxies and trillions of stars and trillions of galaxies, or billions of galaxies and trillions. So just another glowing, like these two lights that they're over there, where they have that light in my head. That's what I was about to become. Just that. Just this energy light. And it was fine and perfect. And then there was this moment in which I was looking at the star field, or seeing and feeling the star field, and me was sort of disappearing. It was just like being conscious, but not knowing who conscious was. And suddenly there was this sense that the entire star field was collapsing in on itself. The gazillions of stars were all of a sudden coming in on themselves until they created blackness, nothingness. And that was the end of my consciousness. And then, as if a film were played in reverse, that sense of nothingness created everything. The universe expanded within, like a giant explosion. And I was sailing incredibly fast past stars and past planets to Earth, and then down through Earth, down to California, deep into California, deep into the area of Malibu, right next to this body, and then into that body. And then that body began to move and come, quote, back to life. And it was like a child. I could hardly move. It was like I could hardly see, but I began to see a little bit and hear a little bit. And then this image that's behind me is, there was this moment when I suddenly just gotten a little bit sense of, I'm back, I'm back. But what I felt was the greatest love for everything, for the sky, for the stars, for the mountains, for the cold, for every human being that was there. It was the most expansive sense of love I have ever felt. And that was its major gift, that this was to realize the awesome beauty of being right here, right now. That it is this incredible gift of life, and all around us, it is radiating this joyful bliss that we can connect to. So that was part of the experience, summarized in as short as I could give you. But there
That's
was
so
another thing I
beautiful.
will say, one more
Yeah.
thing that I will say. Many people who have NDEs talk about the fact that they experience their life ran through like a movie. I had a different experience, and I haven't noticed in all the readings and meetings of other people that they've had a similar experience. What I had was that everything that I had ever experienced as Jeremy suddenly occurred to me at the, spontaneously and at the same time. It was like all the experiences I had my entire life, all the things I'd seen, all the books I'd read, all the movies I'd seen, all the music I'd listened to, all the people I met, all the history I knew, everything that this particular being knew happened at the same time in this incredible explosion. And there was a realization that that too was an illusion. That but I was no longer had created everything that I had experienced. Now, I want to make one more reflection, then I'll stop. But there's a wonderful movie that I've just recently seeing. I don't know if you know the movie. It's called The Razor's Edge. It's had Tyrone Power,
Mhm.
an actor from 1947. And it's from a Somerset Maugham book. And there's a moment when this character who's looking for what's the meaning of life? Why is he here? What is he supposed to be doing? And he inevitably gets to India and he meets a guru. And the guru says to him, all of your confusion and doubt, the whole world's all confused and doubt. And it will be that way always when people don't realize what's truly important. What's truly important is within them, and what's really within them is God. That's what within them. But people just don't realize this. But when you do, you will have calmness, forbearance, compassion, selflessness, and everlasting peace. And there are three roads, says this man, from the Indian's perspective, toward getting those. One is the road of faith, one is the road of good works meant to help others, and one is the road of understanding and knowledge leading to wisdom. But in the end, all three roads lead to the same place. And this guy hears this and learns, and he goes up on top of a mountain, and he's visited by the guru, and the guru says, I see what's happened. I see. And the man says, there was this moment, maybe some people who experienced the eclipse yesterday had this moment, where everything was just so miraculous that this character felt he was out of his body, that he was floating, that it was perfect, and that if he died at that very moment, it would have been fine. Because at that moment, he realized, and the guru finishes the sentence, that you and God are one. To some degree, that movie, Somerset Maugham, the writer who wrote the screenplay, summarized to some degree one of the gifts of my near-death or through-death experience was that who we really are, maybe there's no even word for it.
Ugh, that was so beautiful. Obviously, you're a very good storyteller. It's what you do for a living. I appreciate so many things that you said, and I think the common thread that I'm really fascinated by is that it's all an illusion. I just got a tattoo on my arm that says life is but a dream because ooh, I just got chills. From your hell experience, right? I've heard so many near-death experiencers. I love that you call it a through death experience. Say the same thing that, and I know it's so controversial. I have religious friends who don't like when I say this, but but it's sort of been backed up by people like you that I really do have this belief that on the other side or other dimension or when you're out of your body, that I've been told that you can imagine something and it appears before you within, I mean, just even before you've had the thought almost. It just happens, it materializes. So if you expect to go to hell, you may have a hell experience. If you were raised that if you're a sinner, you will go to hell, you may have an experience. If you are a Jesus follower, you may see Jesus. And some people see Jesus who aren't. But it's so much about what we envision. And I love that idea that it's sort of a projection. And I always say this too, like we're living in a matrix, it's all a simulation, which I always tell myself when I'm afraid of something. It's all a simulation, just let it project out. And I'd love to know how that translates to our life what you think
Well,
yeah, like in terms of like manifesting things, or how much power as humans do we have to create our own reality?
it's a fascinating issue because, in a way, what I was saying is everything we experience, we create.
Yeah.
But that's such a, it sounds egotistic and narcissistic, if anything, and also sounds like, well, yeah, you didn't create that tree out there or those
Yeah.
birds that are flying there. So what are you talking about? But in a way, the depth of this experience was that all of this is interconnected. That bird and those plants and those paintings and you and me, we're all in the way like the matrix, but a bit better formed like the web itself, both the web of, let's say, the microorganisms, like the webs of mushrooms, for example, and fungi, which are these incredible connections, or the web that we're all now living in, as exemplified by this ability to have this communication in this way. We are all connected. And to get that on whatever levels you get it, whether you get it intellectually or you have it emotionally, or you have an experience, a spiritual experience, that seems the common thing, which is, oh, this is all one thing, manifesting in this spectacular array of varieties, but in the end, one thing. But there is something that we're conscious of because, and there's a wonderful book called The Untethered Soul by
Hmm.
Singer. His name is. You may know the book, and
I
some of
do.
your viewers may know it. It's a fabulous book. And one of the things he's talking about is the idea that you have the possibility of living through the difficult times, whether they're physical or emotional, and not being those times. There was a great teacher that I got exposed to through a woman named Gangaji, who was the third generation teacher from this. She's around here in the United States and Europe as well. And the teacher of this is a guy named Ramana Maharshi. And he lived, I think, till 1949. And he was truly an inspired and, I guess, enlightened being. But he had something very, very simple to say. He said, ask yourself who it is that's having the experience you're having. Oh, wait, what does that mean? Wait. Well, if you're in some kind of physical pain, if you're particularly in an emotional pain, sometimes like anger or sadness, we just get overwhelmed and it takes us over. And we are sadness and we are anger but we're also the witness of that. And to recognize that that also is who we are. We're the person, in a way, watching the movie. In many ways, there are times when we're the person making the movie. But the issue is that we do not have to be limited by the rush and the triggers of particularly emotions that so overwhelm us that that's who we think we are. Yeah, I have a pain in my, torn meniscus over here, and it hurts. But that's not who I am. And I don't have to only pay attention to the pain. Doesn't mean I don't acknowledge it. Doesn't mean that there's a real pain. But there's also, my mind can focus somewhere else as well. I have a choice of focus. So therefore, those people think, you know, I'm going to go to hell. Well, yeah, you are. But guess what? It's not real. And you can get past it. And that's very, very powerful for
Yeah.
people to read. Because that means you also get past fear, which always is the thing that limits us constantly. We get so fearful and afraid we won't do anything. We freeze up. But if we realize that too, yeah, it's there, and then you can move past that too.
Hmm.
Recognize you continually move past, because we do. That is so freeing. That's liberating. That you can then not close off your heart out of fear, but constantly open it even when it's a difficult time.
I love that. false evidence appearing real. Or yes, fear. That's right. That's also so well said. There is we met because we were in a sharing group about UFOs, ETs, experiencers, and this is something that we discussed. Yes, thank you. Let's talk about Roswell. So this is something that we discussed because you and I think, connected over this specifically. That I said that I'd always had this idea of like spirits and ghosts, if you will, or that's one thing, and then UFOs and spaceships. I always thought of that as like a totally different thing, of these different phenomenon and or phenomena rather. And I personally was not really necessarily a big believer. I wasn't sure. I always was like, no, it's just military stuff. And people think that it's aliens. Well, then I shared that I'd had an experience and you had too. Uh, and so we talked about how spirituality and paranormal, I guess, I don't know what else to call it, but it is all the same thing, that we are all beings in this vast universe, and it is all part of the greater beingness of everything. And I'd love to hear you talk about, first of all, Roswell, the movie that you wrote the story for, directed, produced. Um, because did you pitch this as a movie, or were you approached to work on were you like, this is my interest, so I'm going to pitch this story and I'm going to direct and produce it? Or were they like, hey, Jeremy, we know your work, so we're going to do a movie? And, you know,
Here's
what brought you to that? Yeah.
here's the interesting thing about because you we were talking about it a little earlier. How much of your life do you determine, and how much of your life is in fact determined by
Yeah.
who knows what? Are you choosing, or are you being at times chosen?
Hmm.
I feel like this is this dynamic that happens for all of us, that in part we make choices. In fact, the amazing thing about being a human being, and in a way it is like the creator, is that we make a choice. And we can choose some things that are beneficial to ourselves and others, and we can choose some things that are not. So we have this, pull back and forth about, do I do this? Like, well, I'm gonna, but if I do that, then this is gonna. Anyway, so the issue of choice and how much of your life have you actually chosen and determined? And I feel that in my life, there have been moments where I have been chosen. And this is one of them.
Yeah.
I went to the American Film Institute when it first started here in Los Angeles. And there were very few of us. It was a conservatory. There were like 12 people there. And one of them was this strange guy who was very, very interested in sort of, I don't know, monster movies. And I wasn't interested in that stuff at all. But we stayed, in communication. And our teacher, a wonderful man named Frank Danielle, um, was not a teacher then because there were no teachers there. But the point is, he was the guy who was running the place, and um, he was having a birthday party many years later, and I thought, should I go to it? I haven't seen him in years. No, okay, so I'll go to it. So I go to it, and he's a wonderful guy, and I suddenly see this guy over here from the AFI, who the monster guy. Didn't really know him, and he comes over to me, and I'm thinking, oh, how do I get out of this? Can I get a drink over here? Can I, And he corners me, and he starts to tell me this story. Paul David's his name, and he's now very well known in the UFO world. I didn't know anything about UFOs, and when he said the word UFO, didn't know what it meant. Um, but he tells me this story that he and his two kids, one day in the hills of in Washington Heights here in Los Angeles, looked out the window and saw clearly an object that moved, did, that like no other object did. And what was it? And he then became obsessed with the whole issue of UFOs because he'd seen it. And he then told me the Roswell story. Never heard of any of this. 2 days later, I'm on an airplane with the head of HBO. We're flying somewhere because I'd just done a movie for them. And I tell him the Roswell story. And he says, at 40,000 feet in a small jet, I want to do that. And that's
Yeah.
how that story emerged. Now, I knew nothing about UFOs, and I have not had an encounter with aliens. It's not part of my encounter. I've done um, uh, but I medicine plants they're called that definitely had some very very intense and bizarre experiences. This is a summation of many
Oh,
of
is
them.
that the ayahuasca one?
That's correct.
Yeah.
This is 6 ayahuasca journeys. This is one of the paintings I did of things that happen within that. But there's no alien in the group. There are some
Right.
very weird characters that I encountered, but there was no alien in the group. And my point about this is that for me, I hadn't had that experience. Paul had. And then I started meeting lots of people who had, from famous people who wrote books about it, with the negative aliens taking them away and having, these encounters that are invasive, to, people who had, downloaded information that allowed them to think of the world as a phenomenal space. So my understanding of this, and I think it's very limited because I've not had a personal experience, but my understanding of this is that from my tradition, we live in 4 different sort of spaces, 4 different worlds at the same time. We live in this world, which is the world of sort of making, of the stuff. It's the world of the senses, touching and sight, all the stuff I lost during my through death or near death experience. Then we also live in this tradition in a more dream world, but simultaneously. And this is more, the possibility of ghosts, the possibility of sort of angels. Then we live in another simultaneously world that is a pure energetic world. And then we live in another world called nearness. It can't even be really defined, but it has to do with, on some level that I don't understand, our connection to the Creator. But we're living in these 4 worlds all the time. And there are, I think, breakthroughs in these worlds. And sometimes what's easier is we can we can deal with the the unknown if it gets defined in a way that we can accept, meaning that if it looks humanoid in some fashion or other, like the Greys, for
Yeah.
example, then we can deal with that because it's within our concept. If the alien looked like a giant blob or a tetrahedron, I don't know if we could even begin to deal with it. So I have a feeling that, and you use the word projection, I have a feeling that for many of us or for many of those who are encountering, I feel there's definitely the breakthrough of the worlds that we live in simultaneously, and they are actually experiencing something very real. But the way they're defining it is in terms of the way we can understand things. So being an anthropomorphic alien, here's a shot from Roswell where they found the in our movie where they're finding the crashed vehicle, but when we were creating our version of the alien looks like, not in this particular picture, this is our crew, but the alien looks like humanoid, big eyes, but it's got hands, it's got arms, and we've seen this repeatedly in all kinds of really good movies that have sort of had aliens. But what if the alien, you know, I don't know, looks like a leaf or like a mushroom?
Yeah. The one I saw was a bright blue light. It was just a bright blue. I'm gonna say it was maybe for those that can see and they're not just listening to the audio only, it's like the size of a tennis ball, but it was translucent, but it could see but it was also dense, and it was looking at me, and it had a whole personality, and it was dancing. It was like Tinkerbell. It was shooting across the room and shooting back and forth and then stopping to look at me, and it felt very playful, and then as soon as I freaked out, it shot straight up in the air and disappeared, and I never saw it again. And it didn't ha it wasn't human, but it had human characteristics of a personality, but without a face. It just seemed, now looking back, it was very friendly and loving, but I just was 14 years old and freaked out because it was the '80s and we didn't have there was no I didn't have now I might say, oh, it came from my phone. It must have been a hologram or something, but there was no light source in that room, and it was so bright and alive. And I'd love to meet you again. I wish it would come back, but yeah, it's not always what you, and that's why it took me so long to piece together that that's what I had experienced.
Also, it's amazing that you had that experience, and
Yeah,
it's wonderful that it was so playful. Uh,
yeah,
and I have a feeling just by talking with you, its playfulness is a reflection of who you are.
yeah,
Because there's a joyfulness in you as well that I can sense, and therefore, when this moment of, I'll say, the interface of different worlds was happening, it would be, in a realm of a greater joy. But here's the also thing that is such a challenge, I think, for all of us, is when we have an experience that really does feel like it's a spiritual realization. It's how to hold on to it. We want to sort of, we don't want it to run away like
mhm,
this ocean is running away and like this mountain's running away. We want it to stay with us, but it doesn't. And part of it is that it's like being given a glimpse, like you were given a glimpse,
mhm.
to excite us about the possibilities
Yeah.
and maybe stimulate us to create even more of those possibilities and appreciate them as well. But the idea of being able to sort of hold on to the magic, I think it's like, no, it's going to move on.
Yeah.
And in a way, we want to appreciate it, but there's also a certain, oh, I wish it had stayed.
I know. And now I wish I hadn't screamed. Like, could we have, what did you, why was it there? And just a couple of years before that, I had shared in our group that I saw a UFO in our backyard and it was hovering over the woods in my backyard. This was in Westport, Connecticut, where you may be familiar with because it's near New York City and a lot of creative types. But there was woods over the backyard and it had 3 prongs and it had 3 different colored lights, and I was on the phone with my friend Holly, and I said, "There's something hovering over the woods," and I was like, "I guess it's probably a helicopter," but then I noticed it's not making any sound at all, and it's also just still, like, it's not moving, it's just hovering there, and then I was looking at it and looking at it, and then all of a sudden, it just shot straight up without a sound. I still didn't put together UFO, but the next day she said there were reports of a UFO sighting in Westport, and now I'm kind of like, "Why in my back?" Because so there's a UFO in my backyard, and then maybe 2 years later, this thing forms, and you have to wonder, was it for were they trying to reach me? Am I one of those starseed people? They're trying to say hi, or is it like a portal in Westport, Connecticut at this longitude and latitude where they're popping through dimensions?
I mean, listen, it's a fascinating question. We're not going to know the
Yeah,
answer. The one
right.
thing I like, though, is that you've had this experience and others have the experience that, and I like the word dimensions, that there is the dimensions that we actually live in. Most of the time, the density of this dimension is so strong that we don't really take the breath to recognize that there's more here than meets the eye. It's
Right.
like this, you know,
Oh, that's beautiful.
this character here. This is a drawing that I did of, if you can see here,
You're
here
so
that
multi-talented. That's a great drawing.
this is Jacob, the Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This is Jacob, and he was wandering through actually the wilderness, concerned about his angry brother who was threatened to kill him, Esau. But he was surrounded by these, in the story, that is, these protective, what they're called malachim, which means messengers, but we translate that often, that's the Hebrew, we translate it often to angels. So here's a here's this character who's really unnerved by what's going to happen, and yet there are these guiding forces that obviously here, drawn as angels, that are there for us. And I have a feeling there's a truth to this. Maybe you have to be lucky like Jacob to actually get close to experiencing it. Or maybe my drawing, I'm not sure he sees it, but they certainly are there. And I think as for you, you're being reminded. And it is reminding you so that your way of looking at the world now is there's a more wonder to it, even though the world is filled with wonder all the time. But there's even more, the unseen wonder that in many ways is the source of life itself. And
Yeah.
you get a glimpse of it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I was a casting assistant, Dan Bell Casting, and you may know him, when I lived in LA. And we were working on a casting for a horror, like a paranormal show. So before then, I had sort of kind of gone through agnostic, atheistic periods in my life. And while we were casting, we were looking for these stories, and I ended up speaking to a medium. And I told her the story about the blue orb, and she said that was there so that when you didn't believe, later you would go back to that and then say, "Oh, wait a second. Well, if that's not true, then what was that?" And that was when my spiritual journey began, was like, this might have been 6 years ago, some 7 years ago. And she said, "It was there to remind you of who you are." I guess that's how I would say it. And you were saying it's remembering where we came from. It's remembering that there is magic, that and it was there to say, "Hey, you'll need me again later for reference." That's it.
Yeah. It's interesting too that you use the word remember,
Yeah.
because also it's remember. It's reassembling ourselves. And I think these gifts um, allow that to happen. And
Yeah.
and for me, and now I realize, particularly in the world of the world of UFO experiences, for some people this is not positive. This was an unwanted encounter.
Mhm.
But I'm so glad for you it was a positive one, and I feel like that's again, do we project the negative, if we're feeling negative, onto what in fact we're going to experience and then turn an angel into a devil? Um,
Yeah.
but,
Yeah. And I actually have another question going back to your experience, but before I forget, ooh, I'll let you comment on that too.
no, no, keep going.
I was just gonna say that, have you watched the Netflix series Encounters?
No,
It is so well done, it's shot on film. They're making these things so much better because,
yeah,
so often these UFO shows, I watch them and I'm like, "This is not it's not well produced," and it kind of, like, isn't very convincing, but Encounters is each episode is a different story, and it's shot on film. It's just cinematically beautiful, so engaging, highly recommend.
cool.
So one of the episodes, they are interviewing a guy who works out here where like near where I live, Arizona, New Mexico, and his job is he's not border patrol, but he's something like that, where they have him on the paranormal division kind of like thing. So he investigates Bigfoot. Right? So I always thought Bigfoot was just a guy in a costume. I'm like, "Come, that's not a thing." And I'm like, if there were this like if there is this species, we would have more than one or two. So I've never really been a believer, but after watching this episode, people just talked about seeing Bigfoot and also Bigfoot like rattling their doors and stuff. And then all of a sudden it would just disappear into the night. And I was like, now that makes sense to me. Because I was like, because the idea is that Bigfoot is in another dimension. It's like a creature that exists in another dimension. It's coming through a portal. So they're just popping in and popping out, and suddenly I'm like, "Well, now see, I can get down with that." Which is, like, crazy.
I like that. I think that's an accurate way of looking at things.
I
That
could buy that.
portals. I like that a lot.
Yeah,
Uh,
more than that where there's this actual creature that exists. I was like, "Oh, yeah, he's coming from another dimension, of course."
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, tell me what's in your background here.
Oh, actually, this is just another drawing about talking about other dimensions. This is a prophetess who is sort of It's a complicated story. I think this image just popped up, not intentionally,
Not intentionally, okay, you weren't trying to
but
draw
it just,
attention.
yeah, it's just, um, it's a story of a prophetess, and then sort of the whole idea of prophets sort of saying what's about to happen, and where are they getting the information from, and who's talking to the prophet, and does the prophet really have truth to say, or is it coming from another space? Uh,
Yeah. Did you have any, oh, that's I love that background. Did you have any thoughts about that, about sort of popping through dimensions? Just as some people say that UFOs are popping out of the water because
yeah.
there's some kind of a portal there. Does that make sense to you, and what do you know about, or what's your opinion about that?
Well, I think that, as I said, I think there are dimensions. I was talking about those four dimensions that I was saying that out of my tradition. I think there's no question that there is this possibility of opening up to um, deeper dimensions. But it's interesting. I think also part of that is getting past the humanoid part of it
Yeah.
and getting into what I would call sort of the geometric perfection of interconnection. I used that word earlier, but I'm going to use it again because it feels like this image is by Alex Gray, a wonderful artist and spiritual, brilliant being. And what I'm liking about the image just at this second is you can feel this is all sort of one thing in its multiplicity, but it's all sort of one. And that's, I think, the these openings are to when they really are working, they expand who you are, and then you carry that with you to the next space. So I feel like that's more, but I don't know if you can. I don't know if you go to Sedona and that happens automatically.
Yeah. Not automatically. I go there all the
I
time,
don't
but
know if
it's
there's sort of like special portal spaces and go right over here. If you take a left over here and up the
right.
hill, you're it's going to happen.
I hike there all the time, and people are like, "Well, you're a medium. What do you feel?" I'm like, "Well, it's not so much that. It's just it's the one of the wonders of the world. It's so incredibly beautiful that you can't help but be in awe of everything that exists, but I can't say that I feel more spiritual energy there than I do in my daily life necessarily. That just might be me. But it's definitely inspiring, and it looks like you're in I always think it looks like a movie set, like I'm in a CGI world, and it does not look real. It looks like somebody created it
You know
for a
what? I
movie.
say that CGI world. I wonder for those people who are obsessed with gaming,
Yeah.
which lots of them, whether for them that those worlds are more real than
Mm, yeah.
and we've entered a space and a time of creativity that is we're right in it at this very moment that is absolutely transformative and exponential.
Mhm.
The idea that if you some of you use AI and text to image, some of the imagery you can do is just
Yeah,
quite amazing.
astounding.
Just this, but text to moving image, literally this month, that's what's happening. Well, that means you can create a visual world in front of you, not just a still one, a moving one. And if you start to wear these incredibly expensive glasses that you're on and start to live in it, what worlds are we really in now? It is an amazing time we're living in. And I don't think anyone has any idea what it's going to really mean.
I know. It's funny because the irony is I'm a voice actor, and I used to make six figures doing this, but not anymore. And now so much of it is AI. And ironically, so I was just saying to a friend the other day, most of today I did like 4 auditions for AI. Like it was like, this new AI thing. I'm like, so I'm basically auditioning to tell you about AI that's going to steal my job. That's going to steal my job. But that's all I feel like. All the copy that I'm getting is about AI, AI generated, AI this, AI that, and it's scary and also incredible what can be done. And even to me, that's proof of a higher intelligence. People will say, no, humans created that. I'm like, yes, but humans have the intelligence to create computers, to create buildings, architectural plans, music.
One of
That
my
is
favorite things
insane.
was that you know that the idea, in fact, in Roswell, we met in the movie, we
Yeah.
met some of this, but that certain things that got part of our worlds now, like this is one that really hit me was Velcro.
Yeah.
That Velcro was a gift from the other worlds.
Right. That's
I'm
oh
not
yeah.
sure where AI is in terms of that, but
Well,
we're
Velcro
going
was
to find
RAI
out.
back in the day. I would love to know. Well, I'll go back, but I do have a question about Roswell also too, because I do also want to know when you came out of your near-death experience. I mean, what had happened to you? I'm just curious. How did you come back? And also, I'd love to know sort of how did you process the experience that you'd had after your near-death experience or your through-death experience?
I think the answer is I still am. Every
Yeah.
time I tell the story, I relive it in some level
Yeah.
because I would love to be able to be in the place of where is it that me radiating and receiving love, and just that's
Yeah.
what's happening because that was the major gift of this journey was that there is the capacity to totally appreciate the wonder of beingness in such a way that your heart just is it, it just expanded. And I'm not there most of the time.
Yeah.
I'm just not.
Look,
You
honey,
know,
you work in
my kids,
Hollywood. There's a lot of there's a
but
lot
it's
of
life. Just
it is.
what's going on with the relationship here and what happened there, and this and then the politics of our time, and the wars, and then the climate change and gun violence, and it's enough to sort of like say, love.
Yeah.
You're kidding,
Right.
but there's also enough to say, love.
Yeah.
Not kidding.
Yeah.
It's here. It's here right now. So
Yeah.
that's the lesson. And the advantage of retelling it is here. And but I want to share something with you, which is the let me see if I can pull this up for a second. It's not going to be an image, but it is the um, it was here was the lesson that and this I can share. It's in the book, but I'm going to share it because maybe you're not going to read the book. After the experience, in which I knew nothing about, I needed what happened? What was this? So I'm reading about near-death experiences. I'm meeting people who've had them, and I'm looking for spiritual advisors. And I finally find one. It's a guy had polio and just a fascinating guy, a spiritual leader. And I said, I told him the story, and he said, meditate on a feather. What? Meditate on a feather? What do you? Okay. And then he looks at me and he sees I'm totally confused. And I was never a good meditator. Still am not a good meditator. I mean, in the sense of being able to really do that. I'm a good concentrator, but not a good meditator. And he then suddenly looked at me and he smiled and he said, lighten up. Well, you think about a feather, of course, you fly with a feather, right? So you're going to have to be light to fly. But then I made these remarks. This is part of the lessons for me, and I'm just going to share it. Lighten up, which means stop taking everything so seriously and personally.
Yeah.
That's a good one about lightening up. Lighten up. This is a good one too. Lose some weight. Slim down. Now, I thought of this experience as a diet plan, that is an NDA, but you lose weight in the journey for sure because you don't exist anymore. And it is about cardiovascular work because it's about opening your heart. It's liberating your heart. That's lightening up. Remove the heaviness that drags me and you down. That's lightening up. Get rid of unneeded baggage. Boy, oh boy. Instead of cleaning the back office over here, who wants all that stuff?
Right.
No. When I'm gone on the next near death or real death one, nobody's going to want it. Time to get the baggage and move it on so you can feel free to fly, not be weighted down. And also become a light. Lighten up, literally show other people that they too can have the experience like you just described, or have the experience of feeling deep, deep love and wonder. So be a beacon. Show them that. That's lightening up. Lightening up. Be on fire. Be passionate. That's lightening up. You know, the Buddhists say this wonderful thing that they say minimum attachment to stuff and things and emotions, but maximum commitment. If you're going to do it with passion and lighten up. You know, let go of the limits that hold us back. Let go of the constraints of you shouldn't or you couldn't. Let that disappear. Lighten up. And then there's the whole idea of enlightening, like enlightenment, which really means be open to the wonder, be open to the spiritual, be open to the interconnectedness of everything. Lighten up.
Wow, that I kind of want to leave it there, but I already said I was going to ask you one more question, so I'll just do it anyway because that was amazing speech. I want to get up and cheer. Thank you for that. Just wanted to know if in the making of Roswell, what was sort of your biggest takeaway? I mean, I'm sure you've had to speak with, the people involved and I know there's probably stuff you can't share, NDA stuff, but what did it help? Did it open your mind to things? Did you kind of have a revelation about what had happened there? Just sort of, I don't have a specific question as much as what did you learn about UFOs and aliens and that kind of
I learned
phenomena?
something. Well, I've probably learned lots of things. This was the B-29 that where these were the planes that dropped the atom bomb, and Roswell was the Air Force's location of these planes. And so many people, in trying to understand why alien contact may have happened in this very space, were saying it was a wake up call to Earthlings not to destroy the planet. You know, there's a wonderful movie that's been made a number of times, The Day the Earth Stood Still. Robert Wise directed the first one. Nikto Barada or something like that. I can't remember what the robot says, something like that. But one of the major things is the alien spaceship has arrived here on the planet saying, you people have gotten to the place where we realize you have incredible destructive capacities. And we are here to tell you that if you don't shape up and stop the violence, we will stop it for you. Meaning, we'll get rid of you. Now, here's an interesting phenomenon. And I just thought of this at this second. Every single month over the last years has been a month where the temperature on Earth has been higher than ever recorded before. Temperatures in March, we just passed through that. Highest temperatures in the history of recording temperatures for hundreds and hundreds of years, if not more. We are literally destroying the planet and ourselves with our commitment at this moment to fossil fuels and to, methane and poisoning the air. And I just thought about this. When those aliens came, or that alien came in that movie that Steven Spielberg remade, and said, if you people don't shape up, we're going to get rid of you. Well, maybe climate change is just that. It is nature saying, or the powers that be from other worlds through nature, we're going to burn you up because you cannot take responsibility for who you are and what you're doing to your own home. I wonder if this is not, quote, an alien invasion to get rid of us or to wake us up.
That's so interesting, and it resonates I was actually gonna say earlier that I grew up with all these movies were so good when I when I grew up. I just feel like some of the magic, I don't know, maybe because 'cause I'm older, just those Steven Spielberg movies were everything, and, but so many movies were about alien invasion or aliens coming in and the government thought they were evil, but actually they were our friends. E.T., for example, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, like, there's all these phenomenal movies we grew up with, and I do agree that I've heard it said by people that have a lot of these experiences that they're here to help us. You know, that and so in the I believe it was the Encounter series or one I watch all of them. They did talk about how, the when there's a site where there's a nuclear, disaster that could happen, they've recorded UFOs circling. Like, when a nuclear power plant is melting down, suddenly they see all these they're surrounded by UFOs. And whether it's to and this is them trying to stop us from destroying ourselves. So, in fact and I've heard that some of the aliens are not friendly, and then tons of them are, and they're just trying to help us
Yep,
stop doing this.
yep.
So, considering I mean, I know there have always been horrific things that have happened and this is nothing new, but there is hope, and there's so much talk now about we're going to start encountering more of this. We're going to start having more sightings and more alien interference, and I hope that's true.
Listen, every
But
now and then
man,
I honestly want it to be true because every
yeah,
now
me
and then
too.
I think, wouldn't it be great, like in the day the Earth stood still? And by the way, I made work with Stephen on that series called Taken because he'd seen
Oh
Roswell,
yeah.
like Roswell so much that he said, "Will you
Oh,
know,
amazing.
shows?" So um, the idea in that show too was the aliens were in fact interfacing with us, if not in fact interquote breeding with us, in order to get us to a higher consciousness.
Yep.
That was one of the purposes of that particular series as well. I hope we get there. It seems to me there's lots of ways to be reminded that that we can take control of the illusion and make it into a blissful space to be in. And I think that's our responsibility.
Look at that. That's so beautiful. Jeremy Kagan, thank you so much. This has been such an enlightening conversation, and I appreciate you showing up to share your insights, your experiences, and your wisdom. You're such a beautiful speaker, and it means the world to have you here. I'm really excited for people to hear what you have to say. So thank you so much for donating your time and energy.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for allowing me to share. I hope some of the things I'm sharing are of use.